All right. Well, in today's video, I want to talk a little bit about strategic succession planning. Yes, succession planning for internal audit can actually be one of the strategic ways that you take advantage of and propel internal audit in your organization. Now, I get it. A lot of people are thinking, well, maybe I don't need succession planning. Well, you probably do. And I'm going to go through and share some examples of that, some lessons learned, some mistakes that other organizations have made, and maybe why you should consider actually putting together a succession plan for your internal audit function. Now, as I said, there's many reasons why you may want to do this. And it's not just me saying this. This is a topic that comes up regularly in the Audit Leader Forum, which is a group of chief audit executives and other audit leaders uh, from organizations all over the world. And as I said, this comes up regularly. And in fact, I was just having a discussion with somebody earlier this week about a large, very, very large international company that did not have a succession plan in place. Chief audit executive is leaving in only a couple months. They haven't even posted the job yet, which means they don't have a succession plan. Okay. Now, why should we have a succession plan? Well, in the inevitable, if you get hit by a bus sort of a discussion, we should be preparing and planning for what's coming. Part of that is just being responsible for our particular function. And I know a lot of times people that are in the chief audit executive role, they don't want to think about themselves retiring, right? They don't even want to go there. They like their job. They don't want to, even think about the fact that someday they're going to have to retire. And part of it is maybe they're making a good amount of money. The job's pretty good. They feel like they want to hang out for another 5 or 10 years. I understand, right? I've talked with a lot of people, who are that way, but there is an issue with that thinking. And here's what it is. And again, I'm going to give you some real life examples. So again, chief audit executive that I worked with a Fortune 500 company, had everything pretty much going on all cylinders with her department. Things were going great. She had a big staff, no problem with executives. She always had the budget that she needed. Things were really good. She was earning a good salary. She had really good people on her team. And so she didn't really need to work that hard, if you will, right, for the money that she was making. And so, in discussing with her and saying, okay, what is your succession plan? That's how she came back. Well, I don't really want to leave my job because things are going great. I'm earning good money. I'm enjoying what I'm doing. And so, even though I talked to her about it, suggested that she start considering it, she didn't want to consider it because she didn't want to leave. And I understand that. Now, what I also know is if you fast forward a little bit, again, she didn't take my advice, didn't want to do that. And I know, I know one of her direct reports ended up looking for another job and left the organization. Now, maybe she wanted that to happen. Maybe she didn't. I don't know. But here's one of the reasons why succession planning is important. Most people leave their jobs either because they don't like who they work for, their direct manager, or they don't see a future for themselves at the organization. And so, what that means is those people on your team who are really good, those people that you would like to hang around for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is until you retire, the really good people are not going to wait. And if you don't have a succession plan in place, if you're not communicating about that to these individuals, they're going to start listening when recruiters come. So this happened in that particular situation. Okay. A story from my own personal life. One of the chief audit executive roles that I had, I took the role with the company with the intention of moving into one of the top 5 finance positions at this particular company. So I was coming in to establish an internal audit department and was planning then, because a lot of these people that were in these top roles, they'd moved them around, they'd kind of shuffled chairs for a few years, and from that then picked the new CFO from those remaining people. And so obviously the rest of the people, they didn't get the CFO job, and they were pretty close to retirement already. So there was a plan for them to retire shortly. And so I was interested in some of those other positions. Again, that's why I took the role, had open discussions about that, in taking this role. And so what happened was the treasurer position came open. And one thing that the organization said was they wanted someone with deep company experience in that role. Now, I was maybe a little bit young, I was a little bit inexperienced, but I had as much or more knowledge of the company than anyone else, right? I had interned with this company when I was in college. I was their external auditor for many years. I'd worked for several years as the head of internal audit in developing this department. And so I put my name in for that promotion. Now, obviously, they interviewed me. They interviewed other people from the outside. Now, at the end of the day, I didn't get the job, or I'd probably still be working for that company, right? And what had happened was there was an external candidate who had many years of experience as a treasurer with a Fortune 500 company that was interested in the position and interested in moving to the city where we were based. So at the end of the day, the board decided to hire this external candidate instead of me. Now, I don't blame them for that. If I were in their situation, I probably would have done the same thing. But as the internal candidate, as the person who was ambitious, who wanted this other position, how do you think I felt at the end of the day? Well, I wasn't very happy, right? And so what started happening is when recruiters would call me, I started calling them back. I started listening to what other opportunities were out there. Again, it wasn't that I was extremely disappointed in the money I was making or the role that I had and what I was doing, but it was definitely something that made me start listening when recruiters called back. So that's one of the reasons why succession planning is important. You will lose good people if they don't feel there's a future for them at your organization. Okay, that's just the way it is. And I've seen this over and over and over and over again, which is one of the reasons why I'm talking about it today. Okay. Because like I said, there's been several chief audit executives that I've talked to that were within 1 to 2 years of retirement. Most of them don't have a succession plan. Most of them want to drag out, right, their time there, and in so doing, they end up losing a lot of good people. So that's one of the reasons why we should have a succession plan. Another reason for having succession planning is this. If your organization follows succession planning protocols, if they have succession plans in place and you don't for internal audit, then you look like you're not doing your job like everybody else is, right? And so if you're in an organization that has kind of a regimented succession planning, you probably should have that in place as well. If the company hasn't forced you to do it already, you should be proactive in actually doing that for yourself. Okay. So those are some of the reasons why we should be doing succession planning. It's really kind of your responsibility as a leader to help prepare for your successor. And it makes a transition much more smooth, especially if you can have a few months, 3 months, 6 months, maybe even a year, where, both you and whoever is going to take over is doing the job together, and you're slowly starting to give them more and more responsibility. So most of the time when succession planning is most successful is when often it's an internal candidate or an external candidate where there is an overlap with the predecessor and the new person. Now, sometimes that's not the case. If the predecessor is effectively fired, then obviously there's not going to be an overlap, okay? But sometimes people get fired for reasons like not having a succession plan. And the executives in the organization say, well, if you're not going to do it, we're going to take matters into our own hands, okay? So what does succession planning actually look like in internal audit? Well, again, depending on the size of the organization that you are, the size of your audit staff, a lot of those things are going to be variables based on your context. And so we're going to get in and talk a little bit about that as it goes forward. But let me share with you some of the ways that it actually works well. In organizations that have a much more rigorous kind of succession plan, usually right on the org chart itself, they have a listing of who the potential candidates are to fill any particular position, okay? And so again, in our discussions today on the Audit Leader Forum, one of the people was talking about one of the major banks that he worked for, and literally they had about 4 or 5 people who were kind of highlighted as someone who could take over for the chief auditor role. Now, some of those people were in the internal audit department. They reported to the current chief audit executive. Others may be people in compliance or in internal controls over financial reporting. They weren't necessarily all in internal audit, but they had identified even some other candidates throughout the company who could do that job or who could prepare themselves to do that job. They even looked externally and even said, hey, we'd love to have that person maybe take over if they came in from the outside. And so they had a very kind of regimented process in place for that, to where they had people identified, and then they would, from a management team and executive team, actually determine, okay, is this person maybe 1 to 2 years out? Are they 2 to 5 years out? What are some of the things that they maybe still need to do to be able to prepare for that? Because that's one of the other reasons for having this succession planning. Is it's a travesty to get to a point to where the leader is leaving, and the person who thinks maybe that they're going to get to take over, or the couple of people who think they're going to be able to take over, it does them a disservice at that point to say, no, you're not really ready. Well, why didn't you help me prepare a year or 2 ago so I could be ready, right? We owe it to the people who work for us to help make it an easier transition, okay? Now, that's one example, right? Actually highlighting people, assessing their, weaknesses and strengths, and then working with them to kind of prepare them so everybody is ready when the time horizon is there. Now, one of the other people on the call, they have a very regimented succession plan at their company. Everybody does it, the executives. And so there is actually a plan that not only is kind of created, but it's shared and communicated with those people, right? So sometimes in succession planning, the leaders, the executives may kind of get together and point to different people, right, and assess different people, but not tell them, okay? And again, sometimes there's reasons for doing that, sometimes there's not. But in this particular company, which I thought was great, is they actually share that information with the people. And every year, as part of the annual performance review process, They go through that. They talk about, areas where they're working on and developing. And so people know that there's a future for them at the organization, right? So actually communicating those plans to other people helps. Because I told you, one of the biggest reasons why people leave, they don't think they have a future at the company. Well, if they thought they had a future at the company and there were just a few things they needed to work on, and then they showed the initiative to actually work on those things, right? That gives them meaning in their job, and they are more likely to hang around. Because again, retention is a huge issue in internal audit. And so one of the ways that you can help to retain more of the people is from a succession planning standpoint. And when I'm talking about that, in this video, I'm really talking about kind of replacing the chief audit executive. But this really goes for the whole audit team as well, right? So people that are at the staff and senior and manager and director level have an idea of where their career is going. If I'm currently a manager, maybe I'd love to know, what do I need to do to qualify to be a director level, right? And so communicating that, providing them with the resources to help them do that are some of the things that as an audit leader you can do. Sometimes people need just a little bit of coaching, right? And so sometimes I've done that as well, where I coach some of these people who are moving into those leadership roles to help prepare them for a new chief audit executive role. Okay. So those are some of the ways that succession planning can work well. And again, this is, wonderful, especially if you're at a larger company. Maybe you have 10, 20, 30, 50 people on your team. Then succession planning can be much more kind of regimented or formalized in the communication. But, it also affects smaller audit shops. And so again, one of the people who brought up the topic today, smaller audit shop, smaller bank. And this is a person who, again, has been with that organization for 45 plus years, right? She had different roles before, was the one that started internal audit, built it up. And now she's getting to the point where, she doesn't necessarily want to retire, but she wants to spend more time with the grandkids, And once you get to a certain age, you have to start asking yourself, am I doing a disservice by staying longer than I need to? And again, she's starting to work through this herself to know, well, do I have a year left? Do I have 2 years left? Do I have 5 years left? Right? A lot of that is going to be up to her. It's going to be up to maybe the internal candidates that she has. Because that's part of it, right? Is now in a smaller audit shop is looking at who do you have internally, and can someone who is internal actually step up in a year, in 2 years, to be able to do the job? Maybe you have to go outside, right? That's going to vary for each individual organization. But some of the questions that you can start asking yourself, because again, you need to be prepared. And, there's a joke about getting hit by a bus and not coming into work the next day. And we laugh about it. We think, ha, 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 ha. But, lots of things can happen, right? People do die every day. People win the lottery. People get an inheritance. There's all kinds of reasons why somebody may just decide to give it up. Today I was reading something in the Wall Street Journal about one of the hedge fund managers. He's made billions of dollars and just all of a sudden decided, there's too much stress in my job. I'm going to shut down my fund. I'm done, right? He's still a young man, but he has decided to do that, right? And so we never know what the future may hold. And that's why really succession planning is part of our business continuity plans. In fact, for a lot of organizations, succession planning is a big risk, right? And again, you don't have to believe me, but I'll just give you a real life example of one that's actually going on right now. The Walt Disney Company, right? Bob Iger was the CEO there for many years. and he retired. They put in someone else they thought was a good succession plan. They had a whole plan in place. Didn't work out, right? So the new CEO ended up getting fired, and they brought Bob Iger back. Now, Iger's getting ready to want to retire again, right? So they're going through the process again. And so for Disney, his successor, that is a big risk. If they get it wrong, things go off the rails. He had to come out of retirement to help the company again. We've seen this over and over in a lot of different companies. I think Starbucks was the same thing when Schultz left. The new person didn't meet expectations. He had to come back again, right? So we see this, we know this, so why don't we do something about it, right? Okay, so maybe a couple more things here, and then to kind of wrap up on succession planning. How it's going to look for you, I don't know exactly, right? Because you have to kind of answer some of those questions yourself to be able to know what's right for you. Internal candidate, external candidate. Do we have people together, or, internally that we can groom? Do we have somebody who's ready this next year? Is it going to take them 2 to 5 years to get there? And then start making a plan about how you can get there. But again, it has to be communicated to people. Some people don't want to be the chief audit executive. And so if you just in your own mind have, oh, Jason's the perfect fit for this. And Jason's going to be my person who's going to take over. And he can do it. I know he can do it. And I've given him the resources. Well, did you ask Jason if he even wants the job? Because I might say, I don't want the job. And so if that's the case, then your succession planning has been for naught. And so, that's why communicating the plan is actually such an important thing as well. Okay, so a few last considerations to think about. If you are doing succession planning, if you've got internal candidates that you are working to groom, there's a couple of things that you really need to be thinking about. And one of those is that they need to start having more visibility and build deeper relationships with the appropriate peers in the organization. This is one mistake that a lot of companies make. They kind of hide their people from everybody else. And then when these discussions come up with the executives, they're like, oh yeah, Jason's my guy. He's the one who's going to take over for me. Jane's my gal. She's the one that's going to take over for me. And the executives are like, who the hell is Jason? Right? We don't even know who he is. Well, if that's the case, now you have a big hurdle to overcome. What if instead you started inviting these people who are in the succession plan to the audit committee meetings so they can meet the other executives, they can meet the audit committee members? That's a good thing to do, right? To start developing relationships with these other people, so then it becomes a no-brainer at that point, right? If they get on with everybody else, if they've already been doing some of the work, then it makes them a much more logical candidate. Okay, so that's one thing to consider in doing with internal prospects. Another one is to start delegating some of your work to them, right? Effectively, a good succession plan means that over the course of 6 months or a year, the chief audit executive should really work themselves out of a job. Did you hear that? You should work yourself out of a job. You should start giving those responsibilities to some of these other people, see if they're able to do it, get them comfortable with it, teach them, how to do it. And I suggest usually that there is a little bit of an overlap, right? You don't want to go from day one with the new CAE if you can. It's better if you have a little bit of an overlap. 3 months, 6 months, a year. It's going to vary in each organization, okay? But that's another thing for you to consider. Now, the last thing to consider before I wrap up for today's video as well. Sometimes we don't want to let go because we know our successor is going to change things, okay? And so a lot of people like to hang on. They like to leave a legacy. They would prefer that things don't change. But the reality is we got to let go, right? You've done and you've taken the role maybe to where you can take it. And now it's time for somebody else to leave their mark. Because ultimately, that new person coming in, they want to leave their mark just like you left your mark. And so we have to be comfortable actually letting go and letting other people actually do things maybe in a different way than we had done it. Because chances are they may actually do it in a better way. And that has nothing to say that you had done it wrong, right? But it means a fresh perspective, a new personality in the role can actually expand it, can grow it, can make it into something new and really leverage what you have built, right? Without destroying your legacy. And so again, that's another thing to consider. If you're an audit leader who is afraid of that, who doesn't want to give up, your legacy, you are afraid that people are going to change things, well, guess what? They're going to change things. Change is good. We should embrace that. We should encourage that, as well, if you're a good leader, because you shouldn't be afraid of people making better what you already started, because that's really part of the journey anyway. So with that, I'm going to wrap up for today. But again, succession planning, if you're not doing it, I would highly suggest that you consider implementing it more in your internal audit group for all the reasons that we went through today, right? It helps the morale of the organization. It helps reduce the turnover of your staff because they actually feel like there's a future for them at the organization. And it's really kind of the right thing to do as a leader.